My parents didn't just believe I was a failure. They made sure everyone else believed it too. I stayed quiet at my sister's engagement dinner, letting the jokes land, letting the story they'd written about me circulate freely. Then her fiancé leaned toward me and whispered 4 words that froze the room. "Wait. You're that Kate." And just like that, the version of me my family had spent years selling collapsed in front of them. If reputation were currency in my family, I had been bankrupt for years. My parents didn't say it outright. Not at first. They used phrases that sounded gentler, more socially acceptable. Kate is still finding her footing. Kate marches to her own beat. Kate just hasn't landed yet. But those words carried weight. They followed me into rooms I hadn't even entered yet. By the time I arrived, people already knew who I was supposed to be. The disappointment. My younger sister, Emily, had always been the opposite. Predictable. Polished. Easy to explain. She chose paths that came with labels my parents could repeat proudly to friends. Marketing director. Engaged. Homeowner before 30. That night, her engagement dinner was held at a renovated hotel restaurant in downtown Chicago. Brick walls, hanging lights, menus thick enough to feel expensive. My parents loved places like that. They believed success should be visible, tangible, and preferably admired by strangers. I arrived on time, wearing a simple black dress I'd owned for years. Nothing flashy. Nothing that invited questions. I'd learned how to dress to disappear. The table was already half full. Emily sat near the center beside her fiancé, Daniel. My parents flanked them like bookends, greeting guests with practiced warmth. I slid into a seat 2 chairs down, close enough to be included, far enough to be overlooked. It didn't take long. "So proud of you," my father said loudly, lifting his glass toward Emily. "You've always known where you were going." My mother nodded, smiling the smile she saved for moments she hoped others would remember. Some people are just focused. Her eyes flicked toward me for a second before returning to Emily. The message landed the way it always did. Conversation flowed around me. Careers were compared. Promotions announced. Plans discussed. When someone finally turned to me and asked what I'd been up to, my mother answered before I could open my mouth. "Oh, Kate's still exploring," she said lightly. "She's never liked being boxed in." My father chuckled. "She's taken the scenic route." A few polite laughs followed. I smiled, folded my napkin neatly in my lap, and stared at the candle between us. The flame steadied me. If I focused hard enough, I could pretend I was alone. Silence had become my instinct years ago. Not because I lacked words, but because I'd learned how quickly they could be twisted. Any explanation became an opening. Any detail, an invitation for advice I hadn't asked for. So I stopped offering details altogether. Emily leaned into Daniel, glowing. He was well dressed but not loud about it. Observant. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke. When my parents talked, he watched their faces. When Emily spoke, he watched her mouth, attentive in a way that felt genuine. When the jokes turned toward me again, I didn't look up. My father told a story about ambition, about how some people chased stability while others resisted responsibility. My brother, older, smug, always aligned with my parents' view, laughed a little too hard and added, "Kate's always been creative." Creative. The family's favorite euphemism. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I'd learned that resistance only made them push harder, determined to correct me into something recognizable. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this dinner wasn't difficult for me because of what they said. It was difficult because I finally understood why they said it. They needed me to be the failure so their version of success stayed intact. As plates were cleared and glasses refilled, Daniel's attention shifted. Not dramatically, just subtly. He began watching me the way he'd watched the others earlier. When my mother spoke for me again, his brow furrowed. When my brother laughed at a comment I hadn't made, Daniel didn't laugh along. At one point, my mother rested her hand on my arm while explaining to Daniel that I'd always struggled with direction. Her grip was light but possessive, like she was anchoring me in place. I felt something settle in my chest then. Not anger. Certainty. Across the table, Daniel's expression changed. Not sympathetic. Curious. "So, Kate," he said calmly, "what do you actually do?" My brother answered immediately. "She's in tech." Sort of. I met Daniel's eyes for the first time that night. "Operations," I said. Daniel tilted his head. "Domestic." "No." My father cleared his throat. "She doesn't like to get into specifics." Daniel ignored him. "Cross-border?" he asked. I nodded. The table quieted, just slightly. "Logistics." Daniel continued. "Yes." Emily laughed softly. "Daniel, you're interrogating her." He smiled politely. "I'm just trying to understand." Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to change everything. "Wait," he murmured. "You're that Kate, aren't you?" The words hung in the air. My mother froze mid-sip. "What does that mean?" my father asked sharply. Daniel straightened. "Kate Morrison." I nodded once. Emily's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Daniel pulled out his phone, tapped twice, and slid it onto the table. An industry article filled the screen. No photos. Just analysis. Growth metrics. A founder quoted anonymously, praised for discipline and discretion. My name sat there quietly, unmistakable. "This Kate," Daniel said evenly, "built one of the most efficient private logistics platforms I've seen in years." No one spoke. My mother's hand slipped from my arm. My father stared at the phone as if it had betrayed him. My brother scoffed. "That's not." Daniel looked at him. "We tried to partner with her last year." The room seemed to tilt. Emily's voice came out small. "Kate." I finally spoke. "You never asked." Silence swallowed the table whole. No one followed me when I stood. I folded my napkin carefully, placed it beside my plate, and thanked Emily for the invitation. My voice didn't shake. I didn't rush. I didn't look at anyone long enough to invite a response. For years, I'd imagined what it would feel like to finally walk away from a room where I'd been quietly diminished. I used to think it would come with a surge of adrenaline, maybe anger, maybe tears. Instead, it felt precise. Controlled. Like closing a door you'd already measured. As I walked out of the restaurant, the quiet followed me. Not the familiar quiet of dismissal or being overlooked, but something heavier. This silence didn't erase me. It pressed down on everyone else. I could feel it trailing behind me as I crossed the lobby, as the host glanced up and then quickly away, sensing something had ended but not knowing what. The doors opened, and the city met me like it always did. Bright, loud, indifferent. Cars passed. People laughed. A couple argued softly near the corner. Someone hailed a ride. Life continued, untouched by what had just cracked open behind me. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the night air settle against my skin. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. That surprised me most. I didn't check my phone until I reached my apartment. The screen lit up with missed calls and messages, stacked one after another. My mother. My father. My brother. A number I didn't recognize but assumed belonged to someone who suddenly remembered I existed. I set the phone face down on the counter. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I didn't feel guilty for withholding information. I didn't feel anxious about being misunderstood. I felt finished. The silence stretched into days. Not the dramatic kind, where people slam doors or issue ultimatums. This silence was careful, tentative, like my family was testing whether I would blink first. I didn't. I went back to my routines. Early mornings. Quiet work. Calls that required focus and discretion. My life didn't unravel because of what happened at that table. It continued, uninterrupted, because it had never depended on their approval in the first place. When my mother finally reached me, her voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Less certain. Curious in a way that felt desperate, like she was trying to orient herself in a room that had suddenly shifted. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. "Not how did we miss this? Not we're proud of you. Why didn't you tell us?" I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. I thought about the years of half-questions. The interruptions. The way my answers had always been edited, simplified, softened to fit the version of me they preferred. "You never wanted to know," I said gently. She inhaled sharply, as if preparing to argue, then stopped. For once, there was nothing she could refute. No rewrite that didn't sound hollow. My father called the next day. His questions came wrapped in concern but edged with something else. Calculation, perhaps. Opportunity. The same tone he used when discussing investments or leverage. He asked how long it had been going on. Why it wasn't public. Who else knew? I answered briefly. Politely. I didn't volunteer details. I didn't correct his assumptions. I let him sit with the discomfort of not being in control of the narrative. When he paused, waiting for more, I said nothing. He filled the silence with words that felt rushed, misplaced. He talked about how families support each other. About how proud he was now. About how misunderstood things can get. I let him talk himself tired. Emily texted a few days later. "I'm sorry for how things came out," she wrote. "I didn't know." I stared at the message longer than I had the others. Emily had always been the beneficiary of the family's certainty, not its architect. She had grown up surrounded by confidence that she was doing things the right way. I didn't blame her for not questioning a story that worked in her favor. "I know," I replied. "I hope the rest of your night was still good." She sent a heart. Then another apology. Then nothing. Some realizations need time to echo before they settle. Daniel never contacted me again. I wasn't surprised. His role in my life had never been personal. He'd noticed something out of alignment, named it, and moved on. That was enough. He didn't owe me anything, and I didn't need follow-up validation. Weeks passed. Through someone else, I heard how the story had already begun to change. In retellings, my parents claimed they'd always known I was doing something big. That they'd been discreet to protect me. That they'd encouraged me to stay private. I didn't correct them. For the first time, their version of events didn't require my participation. I wasn't obligated to fix it, defend it, or live inside it. What surprised me most wasn't how quickly they adapted. It was how little it mattered. What changed wasn't how they saw me. It was how I stopped seeing myself through them. I noticed it in small moments at first. At meetings, I didn't over-prepare explanations for decisions I already knew were sound. When someone misunderstood me, I didn't rush to clarify unless it mattered. When silence fell, I let it exist. I stopped shrinking. I stopped assuming rooms were built without me in mind. I realized how much energy I'd spent anticipating dismissal, bracing for skepticism, preparing for jokes that framed my life as a cautionary tale. That armor fell away quietly, without ceremony. There was grief in that, too. Not for what I'd lost, but for how long I'd accepted it. I grieved the younger version of myself who thought patience meant endurance. Who believed silence was only a shield, not a choice. Who waited for permission that was never coming. But grief didn't stay long. In its place came clarity. I didn't need to be celebrated by my family to be whole. I didn't need them to understand my work, my choices, or my pace. I needed boundaries, not approval. When the holidays approached, my mother asked if I'd be coming. I told her I wasn't sure yet. And for the first time that was true. That night at the restaurant didn't give me validation. It gave me distance. It showed me that acceptance offered after success isn't the same as belief offered before it. And I didn't owe anyone access to a life they'd already decided wasn't worth paying attention to. I used to think being accepted by my family would finally make me feel settled, anchored, complete. Now I know something different. Understanding myself mattered more than earning a seat at their table. That dinner didn't change who I was. It revealed who I'd already become. If you've ever sat quietly while people rewrote your story out loud, if you've ever been underestimated by the ones who are supposed to see you first, remember this. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't lost. They're just building something that doesn't need permission to exist. Moral lessons. Sometimes the people closest to you will misunderstand your silence and mistake restraint for failure. This story reminds us that not all growth is loud, not all success seeks validation, and not every truth needs to be defended. Being underestimated can be painful, but it can also be protection, space to build without interference. Real strength isn't proven through confrontation or applause, but through clarity, boundaries, and the courage to stop shrinking for those who only see worth when it benefits them.